Connor O'Gara with us every other week here on 365 Sports from Saturday Down South. I will say, you guys have more fun on your website than most college. Like, college football can be very severe right now. And some mornings I wake up and when I go, I go through my list of things, like even the stuff that's kind of heavy, you guys just do such a great job with it. And I know I've probably told you that before, but some days when I get kind of tired of the drag of college football and I just pop on Saturday Down South, and you guys have this kind of neat way of looking at like, yeah, this sucks, but let's go have some fun.
I appreciate that. That means a lot. And look, there's a lot of serious stuff going on right now. Everybody wants to talk about revenue sharing and what's it going to look like in the latter half of the decade and what's the House settlement going to be and stuff that, like, honestly bores me to think about. And I understand it has huge implications, but I love talking about the actual Saturdays, especially when we're in the middle of the fall and when we have intriguing storylines and matchups galore. So yeah, I'm not one necessarily to shy away from the serious stuff, but I'd like to think, and I appreciate you saying that, I'd like to think that we do a pretty good job of keeping the casual fan very engaged and involved.
Yeah, remind us why we like this, because it's fun. This is fun. It's awesome. That's why we love college football. Before we get into the games, so one of the things I think a lot of the world is kind of surprised about, given how the first month of the season went, is that Florida doesn't completely suck. Like, they are average. I mean, like, they are the definition of it. And I think that some of the harder games that people thought they might have at the front end of their schedule, it worked out for Florida. That UCF is in a tailspin, that Kentucky, can't score. All these things have laid out in their favor, but they've taken advantage of it. DJ Lagway, while still looking like a true freshman, I mean, he's going to be fun. I mean, whatever his future is, it's going to be fun. Is there a path for Billy Napier to stay that doesn't involve him sweeping the back half, which the only game they're going to be favored in is against Florida State, by far the most disappointing team in the country?
Yeah, I definitely think there's a path. I think it begins this weekend. I think if they beat Georgia, I think Billy's back. Mm-hmm. Because think about the optics of what that would mean. I mean, Florida has lost 12 consecutive games against AP top 25 competition away from the Swamp. That dates back to 4 years ago when they last beat Georgia, which was also the last time that Georgia lost to a team not named Alabama. And think about how much this would make a statement to everybody that's making that decision if Billy Napier beat Georgia with DJ Lagway, his guy, the true freshman, the Gatorade National Player of the Year, the guy that Florida fans have just been chomping at the bit to be able to see against real competition. Well, they're going to see it this weekend. Now, I don't think that means if they lose that he's absolutely gone, but I think this is the only game left on the schedule where I would definitively say if you win this one, you're back. You've earned another year to be able to show what you can do with another year of Lagway. But you're right. I mean, they've been a much better team in the month of October. They really have. Their run defense is the biggest area where they've taken those next steps, and that interior defensive line deserves a lot of credit because in the first part of the season, they were not good up front, and I thought they were going to get trucked by the two best non-service academy rushing attacks in college football at the time, which was UCF and Tennessee, and they held their own against both of those teams, and they're probably a Billy Napier kick the extra point, 2-point conversion decision away from being 4-0 in that stretch and feeling really good about their chances going into this matchup.
Yeah. And look, Georgia's really good, but this is not classic Georgia. I think everybody is feeling to varying degrees. I mean, Georgia's not going to it's a mosquito bite to Georgia. It's a bunch of bee stings to Alabama, but transfer portal, all those things have changed depth across the country. So this is not a Georgia team that is unbeatable or cast that long of a shadow anymore, but they're still really, really good.
And that's kind of the name of the game in the 12-team playoff era. I mean, it's okay, your floor might be a little bit lower than what we're used to seeing, but you're still going to win a bunch of games. And how good is your best? Is your best good enough to be scary in a given matchup on any day? Can you be that team that goes through the 12-team playoff and beats elite team after elite team, because when you're at your best, you're pretty darn good. And I think Georgia can still check those boxes, even if I agree with the point that they're not a vintage team. I mean, up until the Texas game, I was saying this is the least gap discipline that Georgia's been since year one of the Kirby Smart era. And then, of course, they totally contained that Texas rushing attack. And it was a really tough go for both Texas quarterbacks. So what is Georgia? That's what everybody's trying to figure out. Are they going to be the team that's going to keep the foot on the gas? Are they all of a sudden just at a different place because they're a bit healthier? Could they look much better with Mykel Williams being able to play closer to his normal snap share, with Tate Ratledge back on that offensive line, maybe as soon as this weekend against Florida? Are they a different team? That's what everybody's kind of waiting to see, because you saw when they were, a bit banged up in some of those key spots, they weren't as good and they were a lot more vulnerable, but they've been able to kind of weather that storm. And I don't think that there's anybody that wants to face Georgia down the stretch.
Yeah, I would want to face him. And Carson Beck has thrown some doubts out there about his ability, so now he might have a chip on his shoulder. The last thing you want is any of those Georgia players with something to prove, because Kirby Smart can take the one tweet about Georgia sucks and be like, look, no one likes you. Everyone's saying you suck now. He's really good at that. He's got that locker room. So yeah, I definitely wouldn't want to see that if I'm anybody they're playing down the stretch.
Yeah, Nolan Smith said on my show about a year and a half ago, he was in the pre-draft process, and one of the things that he said was that in the 22 season, which if you recall, Georgia went undefeated. They were coming off of a national championship, their first in 41 years. And Nolan Smith convinced the entire locker room that someone said Georgia was going 7-5. And that's how that started. And he admitted, look, I got Kirby to kind of buy into that. I got everybody believing that we were going to be going 7-5. Those are the games you have to play when you're a team like Georgia, when you're a team that can, I don't think sleepwalk is a fair thing to say in the SEC, because they don't sleepwalk, but they can get by with their C+ game. And there are not a ton of teams that can do that at the success rate that Georgia can do it. So, yeah, I mean, they've been pushing buttons for the last several years. And who knows, maybe they're pushing those buttons this year. They certainly pushed them against Texas, because, buddy, Kirby had everybody and their mother convinced that Texas was getting all the love in the world and that poor little Georgia wasn't going to be considered the cream of the crop in college football. And by night's end, there was no doubt who that team was.
Yeah. Oh, man. All it takes is one person you trust to tell you he's seen Bigfoot. I mean, like that. Oh, well, maybe there is a Bigfoot. A&M, a fantastic win. I know that Mike Elko's playing coy. I would assume that Marcel Reed is the quarterback now going forward until something else happens, because he's just played great every time he's been out there. And LSU was just an opportunity. South Carolina has a really fast, good defensive front. It would seem that matchup-wise, this is the best thing. Does he make them? Not only, I mean, I know they're a legit playoff contender. Are they an SEC title contender? And could this team actually be good? I mean, A&M's always been good but not great, but could they beat somebody, really beat somebody?
Yeah, I mean, I think they did by beating LSU. Mm-hmm. And look, I am a Connor Weigman apologist, okay? Mm-hmm. I truly am, and I still think he's got good football left in him, and maybe this ends up being a Haynes King sort of situation where he's got to go somewhere else to find his path. I do think that Marcel Reed is going to be given that opportunity moving forward, but are they going to beat those elite teams? Are they going to win an SEC championship? He's got to get better still. And I know that was lost in the shuffle of what he did on Saturday night, because it was one of the most drastic in-game turnarounds that I've ever seen. And it was an unbelievable decision by Mike Elko to play that card at that spot when he's been going to bat for Connor Weigman. That was his guy. They didn't go out in the portal and get a quarterback. They stuck with Connor Weigman. And to go back to Marcel Reed in that moment was a hard decision. And Mike Elko had to look his guy in the eye and say, look, this is what we got to do. This is what this defense is presenting to us. And it worked out. But Marcel Reed's got to improve as a passer. Mm-hmm. They were the last ranked passing offense in the SEC when Mike Elko switched back to Connor Weigman ahead of the Mizzou game, a move that paid off very, very well. Marcel Reed threw 2 passes in that game against LSU because they couldn't stop him in the ground game. He still has to get better in that area if they're going to be a team that's going to win this conference. But he's a redshirt freshman. He looks like he's still getting better. He looks like this offense is just made for him with what the concepts that Colin Klein likes to incorporate. It doesn't mean that he has to throw for 300 passing yards a game, but does he have to be more efficient? Yes. Does he have to take care of the ball? Does he have to be able to maximize those weapons on the outside? Barber and Thomas and these guys can get them going. Absolutely. So I think both things can be true, but I don't think the current exact version of Marcel Reed is all of a sudden like, oh my God, win the SEC championship. And then who knows if he gets better, that's on the table, but he's got to show that first.
My theory on Connor Weigman is that this A&M roster, especially receiver wise, has a bunch of guys who are good number 2 wide receivers. But if he had a Kyron Lacey, a Ryan Williams, an alpha dog like that, it would look a lot different. They've got guys who are good, but they don't have that one guy or another. Like they don't have a straight up burner, like some of these guys have. I think that's kind of what's limiting him a little bit, don't you?
Yeah, and Evan Stewart. How about that?
Yeah, exactly. No Evan Stewart. They don't have that guy.
Yeah, they could have used Evan Stewart. Absolutely. Look, I like Connor Weigman and think that his future is really bright, and think that there are still things that I think he does at such a high level for a guy that really doesn't have a ton of college reps. I mean, this is somebody that basically has, if you piece it all together, one full season worth of college reps, and with more opportunity, I think that will come his way. Maybe it's next year. Then I do think that we'll see those things on display. And he does, I think he does a better job of handling pressure than what some realize. But the 2 games in which obviously he was facing defensive coordinators that can throw all these exotic blitzes at him, he struggled. And he struggled against the Al Golden, Marcus Freeman defense, and he struggled against the Blake Baker defense. And that's going to be hard to ignore. That's going to be something that's going to be used as a knock against him moving forward. But yeah, if he had that dude on the outside that he could just be like, hey, just go make a play. I can trust you. Similar to what Garrett Nussmeier has in some of these spots that allows him to avoid some of these sacks. I do think that would make a big difference.
Upset alert of the week to me would be Ole Miss at Arkansas. Sam Pittman's probably saved his job, barring an epic collapse down the stretch. Taylon Green, super fun. It looks like everything's worked out for them to change the narrative going forward there. How bad would it be for Ole Miss for as much like they went all in? I mean, they certainly pushed their chips to the middle of the table and said, if not now, win. But if they get a third loss anywhere down the stretch and puts them out of the playoff, like, what does that do for Lane Kiffin thinking about his future at Ole Miss? And, like, maybe there's something out there where when we do push all the chips to the middle of the table, we can win. There's a place I can go that has mystique that Ole Miss doesn't really have. Like, those kind of things, those intangibles, because if they lose to Arkansas, if they lose to anybody else down the stretch, they're out. And I would even say they're on the outside looking in right now because of that loss to Kentucky.
Yeah, and if they beat Georgia, all of a sudden, that changes the conversation with them. But the issue isn't necessarily just as simple as like, what is this, like what's their ceiling? Because I think in the portal they've hit on a lot of these guys. I mean, that's kind of the crazy thing. Their entire defensive line are dudes that have been hits in the portal. And JJ Pegues, I realize, is in his 3rd year there. Jared Ivey's in his 2nd year, but Walter Nolan's been phenomenal. I mean, this guy is unreal. Princely Umanmielen has been such a key addition for them and being able to generate pressure up front. And that's what's allowed them to win a couple of these games that they would have otherwise lost. And you see what they are with Trey Harris, a former Louisiana Tech transfer, who's now 2nd in the country in receiving, despite the fact that he, has missed the last game and a half. And I look at this team and I'm like, there are good transfer pieces all over the place. Yeah. But if you don't have the offensive line, and if you don't have the tier 1 coach, which Lane Kiffin is not at this point in his career, this is who you are. And that's the frustrating thing. That's the tough pill to swallow for Lane Kiffin, that I don't know that new surroundings instantly change that. I really don't. There might be a part of that that's just in Kiffin's DNA with his offense. Like, they can't get their rushing attack going, which is just bizarre to see. I mean, their running backs were held to less than 50 rushing yards in that game against Oklahoma. So yeah, I mean, if they lose that game to Arkansas and all of a sudden playoff is absolutely off the table, we're going to be asking some serious questions about Lane Kiffin's future and whether or not he's going to be looking for greener pastures. And if there's a job like Florida that all of a sudden he could be incredibly interested in.
Yeah, I mean, earlier, you said on the show that, like, Lane Kiffin's a pipe dream, but, it's a weird thing of, like, when you hit the wall at a place or when you think you've hit the wall at a place and then all of a sudden it doesn't feel as awesome as it used to.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's how Lane feels in his heart of hearts. You could read the tea leaves and see his frustration about not getting night games. And I hated that, by the way. I'm like, go beat Kentucky and leave no doubt about you being one of the elite programs and setting up elite matchups in your building, and then we can have that conversation. But until then, I don't really want to hear about, oh, you don't get night games. I don't want to hear about it from LSU fans either. Oh, just because the way that the stadium is shaded and 3:30, in the middle of the afternoon, and people are passing out. It's like, all right, well, you're an adult. Like, go hydrate. Don't drink a ton of alcohol, and understand you're going to be sitting in the sun at 3:30. All right, like you signed up to do this, but that's, I guess, a different topic for a different time. Yeah, it does feel like a little bit of that mystique with Lane has kind of worn off, and he seems like a guy that's a little bit fatigued. Who knows? I mean, this last month is going to be so pivotal for the next few years of Lane Kiffin's future.
I've never and that's maybe what makes Ole Miss different than like we here in Waco. Baylor fans complain all the time about 3:30 starts. And I'm like, well, I mean, it's not that big of a deal. I've never heard Alabama complain about it. I've never heard the fans that know, just go. I mean, I think if you experience at the highest level, sometimes you hear those complaints from your fan base a little bit more because they're like, well, now we're not at night. Well, yeah, but Alabama and Georgia are at night. Like, that's what's going to be at night, dude.
Yeah, like this is the TV world that we're living in, and I think SEC fans are experiencing it in a little bit of a different way this year because of the way that the ESPN ABC contract sets up, and all they care about. And if you look at the way that the time structure now has the 12:45 start times as well as the 4:15 start times, all they care about is that you from your couch have no reason to change the channel to any other network other than ESPN and SEC Network and ABC. That's it. If they can get you glued to those three things all day, they have done their job. And with the way that they've set that up, they don't care necessarily, oh, yeah, you're going to be on 3:30 here. You might be a little bit hot because it's going to be 80 degrees. That's reality. Then watch from home. Then just watch from home, watch your own air conditioning, and don't necessarily spend a couple $100 to go to the game.
Yeah, get yourself some YouTube TV. Put all four of them on.
Love it.
It's my heroin. It really is. It absolutely is. I want to ask you about a couple coaches, one in the SEC, one not. Brent Venables. I would say that he would have been on next year's hot seat, but this team is not very talented, and that's not a problem that Oklahoma has had since the day that Bob Stoops walked in the door. Do you think he might be in more trouble than we think?
No, I don't think he is. I think he got that extension a week before they joined the SEC for a very specific reason. And Joe Castiglione and pretty much everybody else at Oklahoma still want to win the breakup. They want to win that breakup.
Yeah.
They're not going to admit fault on that. All right. Like that's the driving force with the way that this sets up the contract extension, in which Pete Thamel said that Brent Venables got a significant raise, was actually not the case. Now, the buyout got bumped up. I think the buyout's at $39 million to fire him after this year. And I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case. They'd have to wait another couple of years if they want to pay less than $32 million to fire Brent Venables. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think they're going to look at some of these limiting factors, i.e. the fact that they're still without their top 5 receivers.
Yeah.
I mean, their offensive line, they've had 7 different offensive lines in 8 games. And some of that's injury, some of that's just poor performance. But you kind of look across the board, and they've actually recruited. And this sounds like I'm making excuses for Brent Venables. I'm not. It's been a disastrous year for Oklahoma. I thought Oklahoma was going to be a 9-3 team, and they have been anything but that. But you kind of look at the way that they're recruiting and the way that they're setting this up. And Brent Venables is recruiting in the interior and recruiting that offensive and defensive line in ways that Lincoln Riley never did. And so he's going to have job security as a result of that. And as a result of this contract, they're not going to go tail between the legs. We need to pull the plug on this. They're going to spend big on an offensive coordinator. I firmly believe that. And I think that they're going to try and make sure that Brent Venables has everything he needs to be able to make this transition work.
All right. I'm curious about Mike Norvell. He just got a massive contract because of the interviewing with Alabama because of 13-0. This is the worst Florida State team since Bobby Bowden walked in the door. I mean, this is worse than that first Bowden team. They have failed every which way but lose. He's not getting fired, but I would say that the directive to get better coaches or change the staff is going to be placed upon him. Where do you what do you think? Do you think he does that in a way that's, I don't want to say seismic, but some coaches that are, whoa, he's really swinging for the fences to try to keep this thing because of the way Florida State's put themselves out there of we're just as good as anybody in the SEC or the Big Ten. We're more popular than most of those teams, blah, 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 to roll out and go 1-7 and then look like a team who, just kind of a fly-by-night thing right now is a bad, bad look.
You have to make changes like that. I mean, you just do. And look, I'll defend it a little bit, and this is wildly disappointing as well, and this is a reason why I don't get paid to make picks. I just make them for the sake of entertainment and enjoy talking about it. I thought they were going to win the ACC this year. I thought they were going to win the ACC and have a first-round bye in the college football playoff, and I thought that the model that he had built with all those hits in the transfer portal, 9 of their 10 guys that were drafted last year were former transfers. I thought that they were going to have a lot of success with that as well. But that hasn't been the case. And so you got to change how you think from a high school recruiting standpoint. And you've got to be willing to make those big time staff changes, because tell me Brian Kelly's not grateful he didn't make those staff changes. I realized that the fourth quarter of that A&M game did not work out particularly well. But up until then, I was thinking to myself, is Blake Baker about to win the Broyles Award with the job that he's done with that defense, which was a total doormat, a defensive staff that Brian Kelly gutted at the end of last year because he said, we just wasted a Heisman Trophy season because our defense was so inept. You have to make those tough decisions. I'll give Ryan Day credit for doing that a few years ago with Jim Knowles by saying, look, we need to get better. We can't afford to keep losing to Michigan. And while that hasn't necessarily resulted in the success they would hope for against their biggest rival, it was still the right move to make. You have to make these tough decisions. That's why we dog Lincoln Riley for having Alex Grinch as his top assistant for all of those years. And if Mike Norvell is not willing to make those big time moves and hurt some feelings, he's going to regret it, and it's going to be his downfall, Florida State.
By the way, speaking of Brian Kelly, he's probably on high alert now about Bryce Underwood and Michigan coming after him. What do you think the end game is for that?
Bryce Underwood gets a lot of money to play competitive college football somewhere. That's the only thing I know, man. In this day and age, I would never rule out anything. With these recruiting battles, I don't get too into the weeds of the recruiting, especially now, just because if it can change after their first year without penalty, why am I caring so much about what they're deciding when they're in their first semester of their senior year? But that's all I know, is that Bryce Underwood will get a lot of money to play college football somewhere, and he's going to be told a lot of things over the course of the next month. Yeah, absolutely. Connor O'Gara, Saturday Down South, one of our favorites. Connor, talk to you in a couple weeks, buddy. Appreciate it, man. All right. That is Connor O'Gara. We've got more 365 Sports next.